So the Spirit Unleashed. Give us a little preview. What's the focus of the Spirit Unleashed?
The Spirit Unleashed is just a continuation with Luke and the prophets. It's the backdrop is restoration, and the idea, and we really see this when we go with Paul's journey. That the idea is that the church is the restored kingdom, and you have in Acts chapter 13 when they go, Paul and Barnabas go to the synagogue and they preach, and then there's rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And then they quote out of Isaiah, that send us as a light to the Gentiles, and so that's that suffering servant passage. The understanding in Second Temple Judaism was that the suffering servant was Israel, the Messiah, but Luke adds that other point. Now it's a church, and so the suffering servant is the kingdom of God. It's the empire, and so and Paul, and Peter and the others saw themselves as this restored kingdom and bringing this this kingdom of God, this empire of God. But it's different. It's not like Rome. It doesn't control land.
Mm-hmm.
The other theme that seems to be really prevalent is resistance and boldness. And I keep, the resistance comes from, the Jewish leaders, pockets of Jewish rebellion, comes from the church itself. Peter very hesitantly goes to Cornelius. I mean, he drags his feet as far as Cornelius. And so there's all of these forms of resistance in Acts, but the thing that seems to triumph is the boldness or the courage of the church, which is by the Spirit. And the end, with the book of, at the very end, Paul's in Rome, in an apartment, and he preaches the gospel unhindered. That's it. And I think, there's been this big interpretation of, did Luke intend volume 3, was there another volume? And actually we think that was the point, the gospel unhindered.
Unhindered.
And unhindered never meant there was no opposition. Unhindered meant the Spirit gives boldness to proclaim the gospel. And I think this is really seen with the Pentecost scene. I use my own translation on this, and I don't use the word tongues, I use the word languages, because I believe that the Spirit empowered the church to take the gospel to be global. And one of the ways of doing that is through the gift of languages. Acts chapter 2, it's very parallel what we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Jubilees, that on Pentecost the president of the community read the Torah in different languages. Book of Jubilees says 70 languages, showing the completeness of the gospel. And so Acts chapter 2, when this happens and they're speaking in languages, you got a group of people that say they're drunk. And my take is that group of people are the Hebraic Jews, the ones who refuse to learn any other language but Hebrew. And you're beginning to see that there's the resistance. The Greek-speaking and Hebrew-speaking Jews kind of have at it, and then pretty soon the Greek-speaking Jews take the gospel to Antioch, and it goes worldwide. And the idea that the Spirit is meant to be global for all people. So that's just a little bit. I know it's a lot, but it's really a little bit.
That's great. When you're talking about that resistance and boldness idea, I just had to go to Acts chapter 5 in my mind, and you have the boldness of some people just financially really contributing into the body of the church, and then you have Ananias and Sapphira that hold it back, and that just seems like this picture of the kingdom of God that doesn't rule by force, it doesn't rule by land, but it rules by the renewal of the Spirit. And as we experience that, we see the kingdom breaking out, but first kind of has to break us before it can break out. There's just some great pictures there.
Well, one thing, you bring up a point that I've gone back and I'll probably be finished. I want this to be published at the end of the year. We'll see. But one of the things that I think about is that story where they're at the temple worshiping, and they're doing all this great work. But it says that it's Acts. I think it's Acts chapter 5, of 32 through 16. It's right after the Ananias and Sapphira episode. But they're worshiping, and it says no one dared join them.
Yes.
And that's referring to their worship. You know, they're worshiping in the temple. No one wants to go in there, but they're bringing the sick to him, and they're seeing this. And one of the challenges I'm making for the church is that we do focus too much on attraction in our worship, and that's one of the things we've had to work with Agape is, you know, the old school in me. You know, what is Sunday like? What is Sunday like? And we worry a lot about that. But it's interesting that the early church, it wasn't an issue. People weren't going to join them for worship. What was the issue was during the week they were out in the community doing the work. And I think that's where we see this boldness of the Spirit is not so much in me standing up on Sunday morning being bold with the sermon. The boldness of the Spirit is, you know, what, you know, we do during the week every day in the community with people, you know, and not just the boldness but the courage. And I think that's going to be a message that we'll keep hitting on with the church.
That's great. So just kind of pulling things together, what would be one encouragement that you would give our listeners who are going to be church planters, they're going to be ministers, they're people who are really looking into how to engage our culture? What would be kind of that one big encouragement you'd offer?
How to engage our culture?
Mm-hmm.
I think that Outreach Magazine does a lot of articles online, and I've been impressed with a lot of the stuff that they're hitting has to do with listening to people. And with my pastoral counseling class, we talk a lot about listening. And I think that we need, if we want to engage our culture, the first thing to do is to know it. And so we want to be out in our communities, listening to people, talking to people. I think too often we go out and we want to tell people what they think. And, you know, that doesn't ever work. I know as a minister, it helps me to listen to people before I preach. Because when I preach, I know what people need and what they're hearing. And I think that for us, we want to have ministers who connect with people and sit with people. I think this is why probably the smaller churches are going to be our better vehicle of doing this, because it forces us to be people-oriented, listen to people, sit down, talk with them, find out where they're at, spend time with them, get to know them, bring them into our lives and love them. And I think when we take on a listening posture, we're going to be able to find out what are people looking for.
Great. Well, thank you, Ron.
I was going to say that was the big critique of Jesus, was who he ate with, who he reclined with, and he wasn't afraid to sit by people and to hang out. He didn't do what they did, but he hung out with them, and I think that gave him the opportunity to listen and share what people needed.
So engage people where they're at.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, this has been great. So we've been talking with Ron Clark, lead planter of the Agape Church in downtown Portland, about his trilogy of books, The God of Second Chances, Jesus Unleashed, and The Spirit Unleashed.